HIV care right out at the fringes in the village system, the village infirmary of Bamako, Mali, and we're setting an example. There are 700 such infirmaries in Mali. If we can show that we can provide HIV care in this center, they can replicate the model in all the other sectors. So I don't want you to go away from this discussion and think we'll never have an HIV vaccine. I think we will have an HIV vaccine. It takes 10 years to really get a vaccine through trials, but what we have to do as a group is decide that we want an HIV vaccine. And what does that mean? The vaccine trials that were currently in process that took years to get to this point, 10 years to do the basic science, and they were just starting the clinical studies. They were projecting that we would have the actual data either this year or the year after from these studies that were now stopped. You can see that it takes years and years and years. So if we don't make a decision now that that's what we want to do, these vaccines that are in the pipeline will never bear fruit. So we are actively carrying our work forward, even though that there is no NIH funding for this particular program right now. We continue to try to compete for funding, but the funding for HIV vaccine research has really gone down to just a trickle. Meanwhile, this is a world map or picture of AIDS deaths in the world. Meanwhile, the problem gets bigger and bigger. So AIDS deaths are predominantly concentrated in Southeast Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, as you can see by this map, whereas health spending, again, disproportionately in Europe, Japan, and the United States. There is money being invested. So this is actually a picture of the funding being spent by different countries of the world, $759 million in the year 2005, about 4% of the gross domestic product of the United States, a little bit less for Ireland and Australia, Brazil, and a number of countries way down at the bottom of the list, spending less than 0.5% of their GDP on vaccine development. But remember this in context. The war budget, $1.4 trillion in 2008. That's what's projected. The U.S. will be spending $711 billion on war. Meanwhile, $759 million is being spent on AIDS vaccines, which is less than 0.1%. So I do think that we can change that dynamic, and to do that we have to be politically active. Not necessarily scientifically active, but politically active. And there are lots of people who have written about this, some of the journalists like Pat Thomas, who's been a leader in terms of questioning how HIV vaccines have been developed, but also John Cohen, who says basically, you know, we need a march of dimes. There was a march of dimes to make a polio vaccine. There was a public support for the creation of a polio vaccine to keep kids from getting paralyzed. And 25 years later, we had a polio vaccine. But we can't say the same about AIDS. The way funding goes, and the researchers among you know this very well, is that the AIDS researcher is always trying to publish, look around, figure out how they can possibly create publishable information with the research that they're doing, because if they don't publish, then they don't make a vaccine. We really just need to go back to basics here and say, just make a vaccine. Use your best tools. We will fund you. Let's let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let's try lots of different approaches, and let's get an AIDS vaccine. Is this asking for too much? And this is Pat Thomas's book, if you haven't read it. It only takes really $20 million for one vaccine from start to finish, and yet we spend $500 billion for Iraq. So I just want to leave you with the concept that hope is a vaccine. This is the direction that we're going in. We really want to get there, and that is all I have to say tonight. So thank you for your attention. I'd be happy to take any questions. You better get up here and answer questions with me. So read Hot Shots. Burning questions. Yes?
The vaccine that you were talking about, that you're helping to create right now, and you said it would have dramatic results in mind with the vaccine that you've created. What type of vaccine is it? Is it a prevention one?
It would be a therapeutic preventative is what we call it, because basically we would be trying to induce that immune response that would lower the amount of virus in your body after you got infected. So that's really what people are hoping to achieve right now, is a vaccine that would contain infection, like the elite controllers. It's a DNA prime and protein boost. So no live viral vectors either. Would problems arise in the misuse of the Merck vaccine? Gaia vaccine? Well, first we have to have the vaccine, and then we'll see if it's misused. In what way do you mean? If it's made in developing world countries, or?
For instance, if they administer too much of it or not enough, could the HIV actually use it, or could it turn into something else?
One of the points about the vaccine that we're trying to develop is that it actually doesn't contain any viable genes from the HIV. In fact, all vaccines are made that way now. They're either whole virus killed, or they're just pieces like a single protein, like that first vaccine I talked about that VaxGen made, and ours is made of even smaller pieces. You can kind of think of a whole virus vaccine as being the whole book, the encyclopedia. Some people make just the protein, which is like a chapter, and we're just putting words. So you can't actually make anything with those words. The virus, that machinery is not functional. It can't cause a bad effect. And also when you give a vaccine, the dose is controlled. You actually do dose ranging studies to look at the most effective and the safest dose before you decide on how it's going to be marketed. So even in developing countries, the dose would be identified and it would be controlled. It would always be the same dose, maybe a little bit less for children, a little bit more from adults, but it would be the same dose. Yes?
All right, you said the Merck vaccine was a Class B vaccine, right? Do you think it would have been more effective in an area that the hepatitis B was more prevalent?
So the question is whether this vanilla vaccine would work in a country where vanilla is the form of the virus being transmitted. When I sort of oversimplify when I say vanilla, clade B, and when you talk about the virus in the United States, it is mostly clade B, but even within clade B, there's so much variation. Remember the kid that I showed you, that pediatric patient? That was a clade B infection, but over 4 years, he developed, 100 different strains of the same clade B virus, each of it which has different epitopes. So I don't think that a single protein from a single virus will actually protect. You do have to use the computer approach to find those Achilles heels, the piece of the virus that is conserved. And that hasn't been done. That simply hasn't been done yet until we started doing it. And also now the Gates Foundation is starting to think about doing it. Yes?
How long is it going to take you guys to complete your vaccine?
It all depends on funding. So if some wonderful person, Larry Ellison, Bill Gates, were to come along,